Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fortune Senior Editor Ellen McGirt.
Well, she was an American girl, raised up in promises. She couldn't help thinking.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Everybody having a good conference? I just want to thank Patrick and the entire family for inviting me. I've loved meeting and talking to so many of you, and I've learned a lot. Contrary to popular opinion, journalists don't get invited lots of places. We usually have to beg to come in, so this has been a delight to be included. This is also a subject that's pretty close to my heart because hypergrowth disruptive companies are the ones that journalists love to write about. They're fascinating for so many ways, founded on usually a great lofty idea. They change cultures and behavior. They say things like, "We move fast and we break things," which is a phrase I've typed and published more times than I can count. And they often have charismatic founders that we love to put on the cover of magazines because of their eye-popping valuations and their great achievements, but also because of the messes that they make. So the big question is, excuse me, when you're moving fast, ethics are rarely at the center of what you're thinking and doing. They're often to the side. So the big question is, can you be innovative? Can you be big? Can you be great? Can you be legendary and still be ethical? So we've got a wonderful panel to tackle this question. Please welcome them to the stage. As soon as they're mic'd up.
Well, I won't back down. No, I won't back down. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down.
So you got mic'd up okay? That worked?
I think we're good.
All right. So we have here Eamon Thoyer. How did I do it here?
Minthauer.
Minthauer. That was terrible. Sorry. Amy Much, just like the word, and you taught me, and Elizabeth Bohannon, from LinkedIn, Under Armour, and Airbnb, respectively, to tackle some of the bigger issues of culture change and ethics, and innovation and disruption. And I will say that you've already disrupted the conference because maybe you've noticed that everyone's coming into Tom Petty music now. That was us.
That's right.
That was our big innovation. Don't back down. Rest in peace, a great innovator himself. So one of the things that was really interesting from our prep conversation, which was wonderful, was that each of you have been instrumental in starting your ethics and compliance programs at your organizations that were already in full throttle when you began. So I thought we could start there, because that really is at the nuts and bolts of why it matters and what are some of the resistance. I thought I'd start with you. One of the things that you talked about was the LinkedIn culture, and that the big worry is that LinkedIn wasn't going to be LinkedIn anymore once adult supervision came into the mix. Could you talk a little bit about what that resistance was and how you handled it?
I think early on there was a realization that we were onto something big and that we were going to move from 100 people to 1,000 people to 10,000 people in a really short order. And we really knew what our vision was as a company. LinkedIn has a really grand vision, which is to create economic opportunity for every member of the workforce. And so we knew what we wanted to do in terms of our BHAG, but we didn't quite know how to get there. And so the focus was on the how. And that's how our culture and our values evolved. It really was a prescriptive set of guidance that our small leadership team at the time thought out in terms of how we want to achieve this big vision, and then what kind of workplace do we really want to work in over the next few years to realize that vision. So that's how it really came about.
So what were some of the early first steps? What did you survey folks? What were some of the?
So I think the reality was that we had hit puberty as a company, and
how many users on the platform?
we have
Then?
We had about 100 million users. Today we have about 550 million users. Wow. So we have a lot of members. Hopefully all of you are members. If not, go to linkedin.com and register. So we experienced tremendous member growth and then also tremendous employee growth. When I joined, there were about 3,500 people. We grew to, currently I think we're at 11,500. And so tremendous growth in a 2 or 3 year time frame. And so what we really did was we scrambled to kind of move from tribal wisdom to institutional knowledge, because we had a lot of information locked up in individuals who'd been in the business from the early days. We wanted to make sure that we captured that vision. So really focused on institutionalizing that knowledge so that we could scale and grow more quickly.
So Amy, you described Under Armour as a underdog culture, which is by its very nature aggressive. Like very nature, you are pushing, you've got a big competitor, you've got a big enemy you need to vanquish. What were some of the elements of that were part of your thinking as you were trying to put a little bit more structure around your ethics and compliance?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I tried not to fight it because it's something that's so ingrained in everyone at Under Armour, myself included, that we all feel like we have something to prove. And you know, with our product line, with everything that we do, that underdog culture and mentality, it is pervasive amongst the company. But we also have, you know, Protect This House, which ties in to, you know, we're the underdogs and we're fighting for everything that we get, and we've got to protect everything that we have. And so I just tried to leverage that to make sure that I was building something that had all of the personality that our company has, because if you try to fight it, then you're not going to be successful.
So what were some of the earlier steps? Could you walk us through like a little bit of a TikTok there?
So honestly, I sort of flew under the radar for a while. With the program, it wasn't a big boom at first. It was something that I took a couple of years to build a really small team, but hopefully a really big program, and tried to influence in small ways all throughout the company, instead of trying to like throw myself out there and, you know, it's time for ethics. That really wasn't going to work either. It was, you know, working in small teams, and we tend to be a siloed organization, which is something that we're really trying to improve upon. But I tried to leverage that by hitting each of the silos individually and building those, you know, partnerships and relationships as I went along.
So Elizabeth, you like to make a joke but when you got to Airbnb, that the only policy that they had in place was related to dogs in the workplace, and of course
the dogs were the issue.
The dogs were the issue, and of course that sounds like a good flashpoint, but that wasn't precisely true.
No.
But you did need to grow from there. Could you talk a little bit about those early days?
Yeah, I mean, as a disruptive company, we were very similar to. It's been kind of fun to hear how similar these three companies are in terms of this anchoring to a set of values that matter a lot. So I'd worked for, you know, publicly traded companies, other companies, and had become a little bit numb to the idea of a company's core values and how they developed and what they stood for. And it was very informative for me at Airbnb to learn how fundamental the core values of Airbnb are to everything we do. And we hire people who live those values. So it's very real, and it was also very much like these other companies, a hyper-growth company. In the beginning, the only real policy, HR kind of policy that was needed beyond the, you know, the legally required ones was do the right thing. And when you're a small group, that means something and that makes sense to everybody. But as you grow, you realize what is the right thing, and there's, you know, generational gaps and all kinds of other things that impact it. So it was really taking the company where it was and building out from there. So we just started with writing a code of ethics that spoke to the values and that spoke in Airbnb language, and then building out using Conversant. Quite honestly, that was probably the anchor of the whole program, was just having a hotline. And once you have a hotline, now you've got to figure out how you're going to respond to all these claims and have workflows and you know, and policies around how to report and how to get help.
Right. And part of being a disruptive company is that you have a lot of very young employees. And that's very exciting, and exciting for them. But the minute a policy statement comes at them, it sounds like, oh, you're just killing my vibe. How do you work with the younger employees and understand who they are and what they need and reflect their language and their ideas and their own concerns and ethical concerns into your programs as they evolve?
So, you know, I think it's really fascinating because our research shows that by 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be composed of millennials. So that's not that far away. And so we better learn how to work with our new workforce. And what we've realized is that millennials really want to ensure that their personal values align with the company's values. And they're much better informed than some of us in the pre-internet era were because they have access to the internet and they research things. So if you tell them they have to do X, they will go and research and find out why they shouldn't do X. And so it has to be a dialogue. And I think that's the key thing in working with millennials in particular is you need to be ready to answer the whys of your policies. You need to have conversations about it. You need to make your policies relatable and understandable. They can't be legalese. I think all of us in this room know that. But you know, lawyers just aren't great marketers, and we have to become better marketers for our message in order for it to resonate in a way that can be embraced.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. I also think that it's important that, you know, I don't assume that a policy is going to be taken offensively. You know, I think that a lot of the time, millennials want to know how to conduct themselves and want to know the expectations, and it's easier to know how to navigate, you know, yourself through your day when you know what is expected of me from an ethical perspective. And you know, I think that we do a lot as a company. We do a lot of good. When we do well, we do good is one of our slogans. And I know that that appeals to millennials as well as, you know, the rest of us. But, you know, as Amin said, we try to be just very simple in our messaging and, you know, don't overcomplicate things. I also have no, you know, I understand that probably only 2 people at the company actually read the policy. That's me, and then those who help me review it. So it's also...
They might read sections of it.
Maybe, if I'm emailing them in total to someone to say, this is the section that you have violated, no. So the communication is really important, and one of my early learnings was that, you know, for me, I like to receive an email, and I like to read the information and then be done with it, and I hate a video. An autoplay, I don't want to see a video, but for the millennial population, they're used to and would prefer video-based messaging. And so that was a pivot, you know, that we had to make sure that we employed in order to get the messaging out there and really heard.
That's interesting. So can we talk about the 2 sides of the ethics thing? And that really came up as we were prepping for the panel. There's the day-to-day stuff that you really need to know, that you're not going to rain shame on your employer and your colleagues, and that you're playing in bounds and that you're not in conflict, all of which is very important and getting more complicated. But then there's the going into new markets part. You know, then there's the aspirational pivots. There's, you know, entering countries, entering new products. How have you learned, either through your own work or through your observations, that these kinds of ethics and values can be brought into a world where you're inventing something out of nothing? Because that's where it seems like people get rewarded for moving fast and breaking everything.
Well, it's a great question, and we did have a pretty rich conversation around it at Airbnb. That's been largely the easy part, and that's because we've got this group of employees who have been selected, carefully selected, for a set of values that the top of which is, you know, be a host. We want to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. As long as you anchor the concepts of ethics to those values, you've got an audience that is already primed to, to want that. What's been tricky is it's not so much for us an employee population who wants to know what's okay and what's not okay. They want to know, what are the standards we're holding our leaders to? What are the standards, we expect from our leaders? And I know we talked about that, this expectation somehow that our leaders are spokespersons for the cause, and the cause is more than an economic win. It's about something very fundamental, like it is at LinkedIn, like it is at Under Armour.
I'd add to that by saying that we use our culture and values really as part of our quality assurance. It's a QA tool that we use to make those big decisions. And so when we're deadlocked in terms of which way to go, we think about our culture and values, and one of our value statements is members first. And so if you say, well, what would be the members first approach? Then the answer is pretty clear. And so we look at our culture and values as really a decision-making guide for us as a company, especially when there's a lot of gray.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, the other thing that we talked about, and it was sort of a general theme, is that for disruptive innovation to work, and to really work in a way that doesn't destroy things that you care about, there has to be an element of generosity in place. That you actually are thinking about something bigger than just, raking it in and looking good for an IPO. Could you talk a little bit about how some of your conversations or some of the processes have instilled this or inspired this in people, and maybe even helped you decide who to promote, who to hire, people for whom this message of collaboration and generosity really resonated? Anything leap to mind?
Yeah, so we even, at Under Armour, we don't have employees, we have teammates, and it is a very strong team mentality. Yes, it is rooted in sport and in sports analogy, but it holds true in the workplace as well. And there can be two sides to that because sometimes when you have a team mentality, you may have more reluctance to report something, wrongdoing on the part of a teammate. And so, what I try to do is make sure that everyone understands the larger picture and their individual contribution, and that ethics is for each of us to contribute in an ethical way. It contributes to just the greater, it sounds cliche, but the greater good, and that we're impacting much more than just getting a shirt onto the rack to sell it. We're impacting jobs in Baltimore and bringing a large company to Baltimore and impacting that city, and trying to create culture change overall, way beyond just the walls of our campus.
Yeah, and for us, it's the sense of community. So we have our host community, our guest community, we have a world community, and we have our workforce community. And so we've got members and teammates and community members. And for us, when we talk to folks, we talk about looking out for the community. And so the ethical concepts are all about what's going to serve the community, what's going to create a thriving community, what are the elements that need to be in place. And it makes it very real and very tangible for the workforce. One of the things our general counsel has been doing is he's going around literally all over the world and meeting with relatively small groups of employees just to have conversations around ethical issues. So he'll give a hypothetical situation. Sometimes they're hypothetical, sometimes not so much. And then gets the crew talking. And it's amazing how hungry our employees are for a deeper conversation. It's not really about rules. It's about the gray areas.
So where does diversity come into play? And I think it's an important conversation now. I also write a daily column about diversity, so it explains the mood I'm often in. It is messy, it is imperative, it's important, it's in the now, and Uber's a perfect example because they've been in the news and some really appalling things have come out of that culture. Susan Fowler's memo is a perfect example. very clear case that having a diverse leadership would have made a difference in many points along that line. So my bigger question is, where does diversity come into play in your thinking about building an ethical culture? Would serious issues of entering new markets be surfaced with a diverse team that may not ever come up if everybody looks the same and is in complete alignment?
Sure. This, as you know, is a huge issue in the Valley in particular, because there's a realization that a handful of engineers sitting in Silicon Valley are creating products that impact the globe.
Right.
And for us to be successful over the long term and the long haul, we need to understand who our customers or our members are. And our members are not just male engineers that make 6 figures in the Valley. And so we need to build product that caters to a wide assortment of people and perspectives. And so part of doing that is to actually reflect who our members are. And so if we have 550 million members around the globe, we need to have equal distribution of gender. We have to have all sorts of different perspectives brought to bear on the products that we're building. And diversity is just the solution for that, right? If you have a diverse mindset in terms of how you're building out your workforce, you're going to get those perspectives at the table so you don't make footfalls in your product development and in your product rollout. So for us, it's critical. It's a very difficult challenge that we're tackling, but as data companies, we're trying to leverage data to help us. But it's not something that you can just flick a switch on and correct. It's a process and a journey for us.
And the tech sector should get more credit than it's getting for releasing your numbers. You know, at Fortune, I sit on a database of 500 companies. Very few of them make their EEOC or related data public. I mean, we really have to push and pull. The tech has really led the way. So it's in no way are you different than the entire universe, the entire sector of big organizations. It reflects bigger biases in the country and the world at large. But man, have you done a service.
Yeah, we approach it
releasing your
differently,
numbers.
don't we?
Yeah, but you've really done a service by opening up the conversation, even though you take the lion's share of the blame.
And the truth of the matter is that you'll take blame for that, and even inside your own walls, it's messy. You know, when your goal is to have your workforce reflect your consumer base, then you're putting a lot of energy into increasing the differences amongst the people who work for the company. And differences can cause clashes. There are different concepts of even what's ethical and what's not ethical. And that comes up in our global workplace when people travel into other countries or are trying to do business in other countries. But it also happens, you know, right in our cafe. And it's what I think really sets at least a disruptive company like Airbnb and many of the tech companies apart is that this willingness to have those conversations. Even our founders, I really respected the way they responded when we got a lot of publicity about a year ago for the discrimination that was actually happening on the Airbnb platform. And the response was, oh my gosh, you know, we're 3 guys and we missed this. And had we had more diversity, we may have built a product that anticipated this. And so there's just been this incredible amount of energy that's gone into solving for a problem, but also owning that we missed it.
Yeah, and you've been largely transparent in the process. I mean, you've taken the time to be private and reflect. So how has that changed public opinion? How have you noticed that the last year in particular has been, you've been reporting, you've been working, you've been sharing information. How has that been for you?
Well, I mean, for the most part, I think we have a very solid brand. Obviously, we have cities that haven't embraced our model, and we do have a very different approach than Uber had, for instance. It's we sit at the table with municipalities, with citizens, with people, and talk about the value of home sharing. But it's all about, it really does, it comes down to the core values and the fact that this whole company operates in a certain way. So, you know, when we had the recent hurricanes and the earthquake in Mexico, Airbnb, we launch our program and we provide free housing to people through our hosts. So we compensate the hosts as if they were paid guests, and the hosts provide housing for people. And that's just what we do. We do that whether we get any press for it. We certainly don't go out and try to, you know, get on the morning talk shows and talk about it. We just do it. And I think that really helps the workforce. If you give them something just as straightforward as this is how we do it. It's not just what we do, but how we do it. It's not that hard for people to understand the value.
One thing I would add is that, you know, because we've taken the effort to gather this data about diversity, I think, especially for people who are technical, they know how to deal with data better than esoteric concept like diversity, right? And so if you say, hey, here's what the data shows, and so they come out with solutions that are really data-driven, right? And so we knew at LinkedIn that we were not attracting a diverse pool of candidates. And so we set out to figure out what the solutions to that could be. And one of the solutions that just came out this week was that we actually have to open offices in different parts of the country where we can get that diverse set of candidates. And so this week we just opened an office in Detroit. I don't think there are that many tech companies set up in Detroit, but we are now. So we could tell from our LinkedIn data that there's a great trove of talent there. Yeah. And so we need to mine it because that talent doesn't come to the Silicon Valley. And so those are the data-driven approaches that we're taking. And I think over the long haul, the more data, the more understanding that we have about the problem, that will help us drive our diversity initiatives.
We've got a few minutes left. I want to make sure that you get any questions that you have answered. You know the drill, wait for the mic, tell us who you are. I can mostly see you. We'll keep talking. Anybody have any questions? There's one back there.
If not, we can keep talking.
Yeah,
Hi,
keep talking.
I have a quick question. I completely understand the need to address, I guess, communication preferences of a new generation. But at the same time, we need to help them grow up and operate in a business and, you know, learn how to be part of an organization. So how do you balance those things?
That's a great question.
I can jump in. You're absolutely right. And I hesitate to say, you know, help them grow up, because I really do see it as a different, to some extent, a new value proposition that's being introduced into the workforce and that we have to manage. So we have to understand where they're coming from. And I know, and I don't even like to say us and them, but you know, I've raised 2 millennials, so I guess I'm one of them, and they're the us. But it's really, to me, it seems like it's all about perspective. And so those of us who are, you know, privileged to be in leadership positions can help people understand right and wrong in the construct of perspective. We talked a lot over the past couple of days about how things were and how things are today, and that change over time is something that I've personally experienced.
Yeah, I don't know. So I have, it's just a team of 3, myself and 2 others, and they are both technically millennials, and they're 2 of the most grown-up and hardworking. I mean, their work ethic is probably better than mine. And, you know, so I just don't, I know that there's a thing there, but I just don't buy into it. I want to do something that is effective. And if that means that I have to, you know, be malleable in order to be effective, then I'm going to be malleable to be effective. I don't want to, you know, I've had conversations with some people, believe it or not, older than me, actually working at Under Armour, And they still are like not on board with working from home 1 day a week. You know?
I was going to say the same thing. Maybe it's not so much about helping the young people grow up,
Yeah.
but teaching the older people to adapt.
Exactly.
Lighten up.
And so,
As a millennial,
You were so mature and wise, we never would have guessed.
no, I can't believe you'd admit it.
so listen, I put my hoodie on and think about this issue a lot. And I think the challenge is to position what we're doing not as compliance or even just ethics, but it's about skills development, right? Especially in the Valley, we give young people an incredible amount of autonomy and authority. And so you have 20-somethings running multi-million-dollar operations, right? And so our goal really is to position the work that we provide, the counsel that we provide, as skills development for them. I think millennials in particular, they are thirsty for knowledge, and a concept that we've learned from our friends at Microsoft is this notion of growth mindset. And if we always position the work that we do as part of their professional development and maturity so that they can assume mantles of leadership down the road, then the stuff that we do resonates a lot more with them. And so again, for me, I think the focus has been, and this has been a journey for me to understand this, but it's really about proper marketing and positioning of our value proposition. Because I think it used to be that you could just say, well, I'm the lawyer, I know what the law is, and you're gonna follow it or I'll fire you, right? That construct doesn't work anymore. And so you have to find different ways to get people to galvanize. And I think the reality is that everybody wants to be part of something bigger than themselves. And so if you position the work that you're doing as part of something bigger, then it'll resonate.
Forces us to simplify as lawyers.
Yeah.
It's not about this complex, group of laws that have to be interpreted. It's more about just what's the right thing to do for this community.
And at high growth, high intensity companies like we all work for, I think, sometimes I use the analogy, it's like a high speed train going by and you need to figure out how you're gonna run along and jump into any car that you can and have a seat, and go along for the ride and make sure that what you're doing is going to be impactful to the people who are on that train with you, because everyone is running so fast all the time that it can be a real challenge to ever get anyone to listen to you. So however I can get people to listen, I'm gonna go ahead and speak that language.
Any other questions? So let's close out with some nuts and bolts, and maybe your greatest hits. Maybe you can brag on yourself a little bit. What are you measuring? What have been some of the big successes in your programs in the last couple of years? And what are some of your goals looking forward?
Well, sure. Our program, much like the programs that we've heard about today, has been iterative. So we start with something pretty basic, and we're evolving. Some of the headlines have, of course, helped us get more traction with our program, but in addition, it's our approach. And so, for instance, what I referenced earlier with our general counsel, he launched a program called Integrity Belongs. And he goes around and he has these just real conversations. There's no PowerPoint, there's no lecture, there's no reciting of the policies. It's just, hey, if this happened and you were part of that, what would you do? Or how should Joe in this hypothetical respond? And that's a source of great pride for us. We are, as my colleague Sarah put it, we're engaged in guerrilla marketing of this program. We've got video boards that have, difficult questions on them that make people think, and that gets them thinking about the Code of Ethics and why it's a real living document. And so while I can't say it's our greatest hit yet, I think it may very well become that.
Yeah. I have a really difficult time doing I'm not even British, and doing a self-brag because I just have a difficult time acknowledging when there's so much more I feel like needs to be done. But I do, look in the rearview mirror and see that we've had a lot of great successes. But it's no rest for the weary. And, I live in the world that I live in and continue to just try to get as much support as I can. And, I have a great leader that is supportive, and I have a lot of other senior executives who know that, we've grown up a lot as an organization, and so now we are starting to embrace, if I kind of look at, the things that are still making me crazy after 5 years, then maybe there's a better way to do it. And that's probably being, doing a risk assessment and figuring out where are the gaps and blah, blah, blah. It's my language, but to get other people to buy into it is, I just consider that to be a success in and of itself.
So for us, we started this journey at LinkedIn to build a formalized compliance program a little over 3 years ago. And a couple of years ago, we started trying to benchmark our progress. And we participated in the Ethisphere survey they do for world's most ethical companies. And lo and behold, to our surprise, we landed on the list of world's most ethical companies. And so it took us a little bit by surprise. And so it was a nice feather in our cap. But we didn't really think much of it. But what's been really interesting and maybe gratifying for us is that we see it crop up in the marketing and branding communications from time to time. And so it's without our prompting. We don't, we just kind of see it on a sign, or we see it in a presentation that LinkedIn's one of the world's most ethical companies, or the CEO talks about how important integrity is in our business, and then talks about us being a world's most ethical company. Those are the kind of indicia for us that we're making traction at the company. Or if a salesperson is like, hey, can I actually share this? Is this okay for me to tell my customer that we're on this list? I think those really help us and kind of inflate our egos a little bit. But it's kind of the day-to-day. I think the biggest point of success for me is really getting phone calls more and more from leaders in the business saying, hey, I've got this issue, can you help me sort it out? Or being invited to present at all hands or company events. Those are meaningful to us because that shows that what we're saying is resonating and it's part and parcel of our business. And really, I think as Wei Chen mentioned, if we can integrate what we do into the business rhythm and really operationalize ethics into the business, then we've done our job.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much. Thank you for being such a good sport about me mangling your name, too. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you.